Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your participation today. I hope we have a great day. So, before we begin, I would like to introduce our topic today. It is communication stereotypes and perceptions of managers. I would like to introduce myself first. My name is Gema Pani, and I am a student at English Department of Universitas Negeri Padang. So, what is actually we're going to talk in our presentation today? Basically, according to Pop, Donovan and Crawford Marsh, stereotypes of speech are important to study because they not only describe how things are, but also prescribe how things should be in social interactions. Stereotype may be eventually prevent effective communication between people. This phenomenon may be particularly true for women in leadership positions because they already face a trade-off between being perceived as as able or competent. It is also likely this double bind exists for other stigmatized groups in the workplace, such as ethnic minorities. So, stereotypes in here is actually what affects the beliefs of people on the communication style toward the managerial in our topic precisely. So what we want to see is how dominant between racial stereotypes or also gender stereotypes toward the communication beliefs and how it is actually implemented in the workplace. In today's sample, it is white working adults and also black managerial and some and so forth. So let's see in the next slide to see how it's begun. In the previous research related to the topic is some researchers have done a research about stereotypes regarding American Africans include beliefs about communication style, like study gender and race stereotypes were jointly investigated by having white college students categorize the speech style of a fictional black male, black female, white female college student. The results indicate that black people's speech in general was viewed as more direct, less socially appropriate, and more emotional, less playful, and tending to be more dominant than white people's speech. Women's speech was believed to be more emotional and slightly less direct than men's speech. Race gave stronger effects than gender. However, two variables did not interact, suggesting that a target's communication style might be judged according to whether race or gender is more silent in a particular situation. So the aim of the research is how we attend and extend the previous research, like I already said to you. And the second one is to examine whether participants drew opened communication stereotypes and assessing the effects of a social skills training program and the communication style and managerial effectiveness of targets itself. So theoretical underpinnings for the stigma of female and minority leaders. The social stigma of female leaders can be explained by role congruity theory, which is based on social role theory, and the stereotype hypothesis. The former persists that the social role of being feminine is invariant with the social role of being a leader, which occurs because people observe men in management roles and then correlate the characteristic of men with the definition of an effective leader. In support of this assertion, Igley and Carroll in 2002 also found that female managers are seen as effective when characteristics such as cooperation or affiliation are required, a situation in which there are perceived congruence between the two roles. However, Igley, Mancagini, and Klonsky in 1992 found that women who led in autocratic stereotypically masculine way are evaluated negatively. So basically, based on the gender stereotypes which happening in the workplace, as we see women is actually negatively seen as a stereotypes of fit with the hypothesis of being a leader. So people say that woman is more emotional, and when it is came to the gender of man, for example, they seen as more or less emotional, and it is actually perceived the congruence between two roles. So what we want to see is how is actually dominant and also stigmatized between the gender is going to affect the beliefs of the communication styles, and it is precise in the managerial leaders of a workplace, which is going to be sampled and implemented in the next slides. So, how we see gender and racial stereotypes of speech. There is a generally held belief that women and men speak differently. And these communication styles are very often portrayed as dichotomous. Some researchers have looked for sex differences in emotional communication. Overall, research from 1970s onward has found that men's speech is stereotyped as articulate, forceful, aggressive, dominating, and blunt, whereas women's speech is characterized as polite, emotional, talkative, gentle, and lacking of humor. Recent research, recent research confirms that these stereotypes remain as of social prescriptions. Speakers still are sanctioned for violating gender communication expectations. In other words, to be considered socially appropriate speakers should adhere to gender-based norms. Similarly, some researchers indicate that Black people's speech is stereotyped as loud and aggressive. The title empirical research that has been done in this area indicates that white participants typically rate Black people's speech as being more emotional, aggressive, talkative, straightforward, and argumentative, in some less socially appropriate. Gender, race, and gender effective interventions. So some problems with individualistic and gender approaches to gender and racial inequality in the workplace is first, they ignore the important interactional and social structural level changes that need to be made for women and ethnic minorities to achieve equality in management. Two, they are implicitly white and do not encompass diversity. Three, they create double bind situations for women and ethnic minorities in management. So basically, in the workplace, that sample between race and also gender, there are different approaches and also different implementation and different response from the participants when they face a certain race, like we call as man and black, white and black, and also the gender as manager or leader if in the position is woman, and also man is actually being categorized and stigmatized for certain reasons, and it's affect their beliefs on the communication styles. But with this diversity and also inequality that happened in the workplace itself is actually making some problems and also some problematic that we call as inequality, and also it brings more harm towards the society, and also how it's going to affect to the people response in a workplace, while we need a unity between and a cooperation between the employee and also the manager as the leader, for example. In some, we know that there are stereotypes about women and men's communication styles, more specifically that men tend to be dominant, forceful, whereas women tend to be soft and polite. These stereotypes may be weaker than in the past, but they are still there. We also know that there are stereotypes about African Americans' communication style, like we see as a man or a white or black. For example, being loud and inappropriate for the black manager, for example, and these stereotypes may be quite strong. However, we do not know much about how these gender and racial stereotypes interact, how general they are, how they extend to targets other than college students, or how they affect perceptions of competence and effectiveness. This study replicates and extends previous research by examining gender and racial speech stereotypes of manager. See, how the method that we conduct in the research itself. First, participants were working adults who were recruited by students undergraduate psychology courses as part of an extra credit what we call it assignment. Surveys were collected from 157 job incumbents. In all, 67 job titles were represented in the sample. The most frequently occurring job titles were man age 21 and administrative assistant, teacher, accountant, and engineer. Example of other titles like consultant, interior designer, social worker, postal employee, and firefighter, and so on and so forth. So the procedure of the research itself is that participants were taught that were taking part in a study about management training. And second, modeling the procedure from POP study, participants were to one of four experimental conditions based on the target's race and sex. Third, each participant was then given a budget to read regarding bully boss syndrome and its associated anti-bullying training, which was explained to be particularly useful with their target group. 4. Participants were asked to rate what effect they believe this training would have on the typical target group members' behavior and outcomes on a scale ranging from 1 to 5. Fifth is participants were also asked to indicate the extent to which they agreed with 4 statements regarding organizational policies about the training on a scale ranging from 1 strongly disagree to 7 strongly agree. 6. Participants were presented with the same 31 bipolar adjective items from the beginning of the survey in a different order and were asked to rate the typical target of group members' communication style after participating in a bully boss training. Again, responses range from 1 to 7. 7. Participants completed the ambivalent sexism inventory, the modern racism scale, and the motivation to control prejudice reactions to scale. So, what's actually the result from this research? First, managerial speech stereotypes. Composite scores were analyzed using a 2 and multivariate analysis of covariance or MANOVA. The MANOVA revealed a significant main effect for target sets. No other main effects or interactions were found, given the overall experiment-wise error protection of this procedure was followed by 5-2 and univariate analysis of covariance 1 for each of the 5 dependent measures. Social appropriateness. In support of hypothesis 1, there was a significant main effect for target race. White targets rated higher in social appropriateness than black targets. Dominance. This analysis also revealed a significant main effect for target race. However, contrary to our prediction in hypothesis 1, white targets were rated are more dominant than black targets. Articulate. In this analysis, there was a significant main effect for target race as well, with white targets perceived as more articulate than black targets. In the aspect of emotional, this analysis revealed a significant main effect for target sex and for target race, with women and black target perceived as more emotional than men and white targets. Humorous. There were no significant main effects or interactions for this dependent measure. And the effects of communication training on managerial speech stereotypes is in examining the prediction that training would be differentially effective or beneficial. Repeated measures MANOVA was conducted. The analysis revealed a significant interaction for time and also for time target race. 8. Effect of training on perceptions of managerial effectiveness and company policy opinions. The ANCOVA of perception of managerial effectiveness revealed a significant interaction effect for target race, target sex, and participant sex, where female participants gave higher effectiveness ratings to female targets than to male targets, and male participants gave higher ratings to male targets than to female targets. In general, participants thought that the training would have a slightly positive effect on the managerial effectiveness for all targets, as evidenced by means that are just above the scale's midpoint. No other significant main effects or interactions were found for managerial effectiveness. In examining our prediction that training would differentially affect participants' opinion about the company policies, a univariate ANOVA was conducted on the composite score for policy opinions. No covariates were used in this analysis, as none of the countermeasures were correlated with dependent variable. The analysis revealed no significant main effects or interactions. Thus, hypotheses 4 and 5 were not supported. So, discussion. The goals is first to investigate communication stereotypes about managers, and we included both race and gender as target attributes. Second, to examine whether participants drew upon these stereotypes in assessing the effects of a social skill training program on the communication style and managerial effectiveness of targets. So the question is right now, first, do working adults hold race and gender-based stereotypes of manager communication style? The participants viewed the communication style of white managers, female, male, as more socially appropriate, polite, sensitive, and cooperative, dominant, articulate, and less emotional than the communication style of black managers. and there were fewer results based on gender. However, women were perceived as more emotional than men. Overall, for college student and working adult participants, race seems to be more salient than gender in evaluating other speech style. The second question is, what are the perceived effects of communication skills training on managers? So, despite the fact that bully broad training has been targeted specifically at female managers, our participants thought that white and male participants would be most effective by becoming more emotional. Another interesting finding was that participants did not think training would have much of an effect of managerial effectiveness. Although female participants thought it would have more an effect on female targets, whereas male participants thought it would have more on effect on male targets itself. Implications, limitations, and future research. These findings point to the necessity of examining communication, race, and gender in a managerial context in a workplace. And in the study by Pop et al. In 2003, the gender and the race of a target influenced evaluations of the target's communication style, but the effects were separate and non-interacting. In our study, race proved more important than gender with respect to initial stereotypes. However, gender played a role in the evaluation of managerial effectiveness. One major limitation of this study was the use of an all-white sample. It would be interesting to investigate the effects of this research with a more diverse population that would enable interaction effects to be examined. For example, like the other ethnics or the other ethnicity would be give a more significant result. But in here we didn't do that. Future research should further investigate beliefs about racial differences in leadership style. There is a need for more research on racial stereotypes as expressed in beliefs about communication style. In particular, why are Black managers perceived as communicating less appropriately? In addition, when and how does managerial status override racial stereotypes about communication? And it is not conducted in our research because we are focused on how dominant whether the racial and gender stereotypes is affecting the communication style, like the emotional aspect and the articulate and so and so forth. Unlike race, gender was relatively unimportant in effective judgments about communication effectiveness. This study underscores how much the beliefs about women's communication skills, and by implication their managerial competence, have changed over the past decade. However, it is also suggests that beliefs about African Americans lack of social appropriateness may still undermine the effectiveness of the Black managers. So thank you very much for your attention, and we came to the question and answer section. So if you have anything to be asked, I'm really glad to hear from you.
All right, Miss. I want to ask question. First, my name is Cinto Dwi Asyura. My question is, why did you interested to take this topic as your research?
Okay, thank you very much. Any other question?
Hello, I want to ask a question. My name is Putri Styvani. My question is, why can this phenomenon happen?
Okay. I would like to answer the first question from Cinto first. Stereotypes and stigma is actually always been interesting topic for me because it's like a society and it is like humanity, and how we perceive and treat other people differently is actually kind of discriminative. So I think communication stereotypes and perception of manager is actually effective to the communication to people's stigma and to people thought about which is racial or gender is affecting to their communication style in the position of manager, because we seen that manager is the one who lead or arrange people or giving a kind of directions toward the employee in workplace. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how different racial and how different gender will affect others' thought about that, which is not really related to the competence itself, but it is based on the background, historical background, what happened in the culture, and so on and so forth. That is why I really want to take and bring up this topic up. And yeah, and for the second question is, this phenomenon happened because, for example, in USA, we know the historical background of apartheid, or like racial racism, and on how the black people and minorities happened there, how Abraham Lincoln declared the independence of majority of American African, and it is still there because stereotypes and stigma is in people mindset. So even if you do a revolution or reformation towards the policy in the government, even if the regime is already changed, people still feel that black is something awful, black is danger, black is aggressive, and that still happen even in workplace between the white and black manager. And also about gender, gender is like, when we know the historical background of how woman is actually not usual to be in workplace, or even being a leader of the employee, that might be a man there, man employee, and it seems like the stereotypes and the stigma is still there. Like people seems to think that a woman manager is time to be more emotional, time to be more subjective, time to be polite. Yes, polite in a good side, because yeah, we are women, we see how to act, we think how to treat the other people with heart more than logic. So that's why I think this phenomenon still happened, because even if until at the end of the day we still learn about history, and people still think in the mindset that those labels is still in our life. So yeah, I think if we have any other questions, you might proceed.
Miss, thank you for
Okay.
your answer.
Yeah, if you have any other arguments, you may argue me now, or you may ask me. Okay, I think it's clear enough about this topic, right? And the question is
Yeah.
already answered first. Yeah, that is actually the 3 points that I already explained in my recent ago, Ella, about communication stereotypes, gender and racial stereotypes, and perceptions of the managers, how they're linked, and how it affects to people's belief on their communication style. So I think that's it. Thank you very much for your participation, for your attention. I hope we can see again in next seminar and with different topic. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi
warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh.
wabarakatuh. Thanks for the seminar, Miss.